c4. Despite the fact that only one piece is freed by this move, against the two that are released by e4 or d4, the English is one of the strongest opening weapons in White's arsenal. It appeals to those who like originality right from the start, as it allows maneuvering of the pieces without coming to grips too early with the enemy. In many forms of this opening, White does not even try to occupy the center. He lets Black mass pieces and pawns there, and then attacks them from the sides. He might fianchetto his bishops, for example, and strike at the center from a distance, in order to undermine it. Should White decide to temper his originality with caution, he can transpose from the English to some form of queen's pawn opening and still retain a fine game. e5. Black develops in the good old-fashioned way. He plants a pawn in the center and frees two pieces for action. Knight c3. White brings a piece out in preference to advancing a center pawn. In fact, on 2. d4. E takes d4. 3. Queen takes d4. Knight c6. The queen must retreat and lose a move. Or if 2. e4. White remains with a backward d-pawn, while the f1 bishop cannot get to c4. Knight f6. Black watches the order of his moves. The knight move is not merely routine development of a piece. Its purpose is to offset the pressure of White's knight and pawn on the d5 square. g3. Clearly with the intention of making room for the bishop at g2, where it will operate on a long diagonal and also contribute to the pressure on d5. d5. Black frees his game by opening new paths for the queenside pieces. Simultaneously, he puts the question to White's c-pawn. C takes d5. White is happy to exchange a flank pawn for a center pawn. At the same time, his c-file, now clear of pawns, offers good prospects for his queen's rook when it gets to c1. Knight takes d5. Such recaptures are practically compulsory. A delay might give White time to protect and hold on to the extra pawn. Bishop g2. White develops a piece with gain of tempo, an attack on the d5 knight. In the old days, Black would probably have met this by 5. Bishop e6. Protecting the knight while developing another piece. Today's players regard with suspicion even the most natural moves, in their search for truth and new ways to win. Knight b6. The bishop can wait. The advantage of this move is that Black is able to retain control of the d4 square, and so prevent White from opening up the center by advancing his d-pawn to d4. After 5. Bishop e6. On the other hand, play might continue. 6. Knight f3. Knight c6. 7. Castle kingside. Bishop e7. 8. d4. When Black is in trouble, since the position is becoming open while his king is still in the center. Knight f3. Again one of White's pieces develops with a threat, this time against the e-pawn. Knight c6. Black defends in the simplest, most natural way by posting the b8 knight on its most effective station. Despite the fact that Black has fewer pieces in play than White, his game is not inferior. He does have a pawn in the center, and his bishops, undeveloped as yet, have great potential, as their cruising range is more extensive than White's. Castle kingside. White does not commit himself, but spirits away the king and mobilizes one of his rooks. Bishop e7. As in the previous game, the bishop's unobtrusive position at e7 is deceptive. It is prepared to keep out invaders and is also on the alert to switch to the attack. d3. White makes room for the c1 bishop to take a hand in the game. Castle kingside. Removes the king from the danger area and gets the rook up on deck. Bishop e3. With the bishop on this square, White may be able to get in d4 and rid himself of Black's cramping center pawn. Bishop g4. An excellent deployment, as the bishop has a powerful restraining effect on White's kingside, as well as on the contemplated advance of his d-pawn. If White does try 10. d4. The response 10. Knight c4 is hard to meet. If White replies 11. Knight takes e5. Then after 11. Knight 6 takes e5. 12. D takes e5. Knight takes e3. 13. F takes e3. He is left with a rickety column of pawns on the e-file. Or if White plays 11. Queen c1. To save his b-pawn and to recapture at e3 with the queen, then 11. Knight takes e3. 12. Queen takes e3. E takes d4. 13. Queen e4. Bishop takes f3. Followed by 14. D takes c3. Wins a piece for Black. White's best line is probably 10. Knight a4. In order to swing the knight to c5, a square which White must try to control in this type of English opening. Otherwise he might continue developing by 10. Rook c1. And only then consider the knight maneuver. h3. A move which is impelled by a desire to make the annoying bishop declare his intentions, either take the knight or vacate the premises. Unfortunately, moves such as this, dictated more by instinct than reason, have an injurious effect on the castle position, as the structure is loosened. Once the pawns near the king make a move, they themselves become more susceptible to attack, in spite of the cluster of pieces ranged around them for protection. Bishop h5. The bishop retreats one square but maintains the pressure. Despite the bishop's restricted mobility, its continued influence is more troublesome to White's position, and his frame of mind. Then would be its return to e6, where it enjoys more freedom but does nothing to disturb the opponent. Rook c1. Evidently in order to control the c-file and perhaps work up an attack on the queen side. A good alternative is 11. Queen b3. Followed, when feasible, by Rook a, d1. And d4, to open the d-file for White's rooks and get some counterplay in the center. Action in the center is the best remedy against a kingside attack. Queen d7. All the pieces must do their bit. The queen moves only one step forward and dominates an important diagonal. Development of the queen serves another purpose in that the first rank is cleared for the rooks. They can now switch over toward the center and get control of the most important files. Knight a4. White's idea is to create a diversion by taking command of c5, with his knight and keeping Black occupied with threats on the queen side. Against routine defensive moves, for instance. 12. King h2. Black gets an attack rolling by 12. f5. And 13. f4. And the pawn will demolish White's kingside pawn formation. Bishop takes f3. Presenting White with an unhappy choice of recaptures. If he takes with the pawn, his d-pawn becomes isolated and weak. If he takes with the bishop, he loses a pawn immediately. Bishop takes f3. White gives up the h-pawn, trusting that he will regain a pawn quickly by his next exchange of pieces. Queen takes h3. After this capture, Black's attacking prospects are very bright. Without bothering to analyze the petty details, he can visualize winning lines of play beginning with 14. f5. Followed either by 15. f4. To destroy White's g-pawn. The key to the defensive structure, or by 15. Rook f6. And then swinging the rook over to g6 or h6. Bishop takes c6. Better than this, which regains the pawn, is 14. Bishop g2. Banishing the queen from the neighborhood of his king. B takes c6. Forced, but an agreeable obligation. Black is quite pleased to see the last of this long-range bishop. Rook takes c6. Material is now equal, but the white king is in danger, with the enemy queen breathing on his neck. Knight d5. A tremendous move. One threat from this beautifully centralized knight is 16. Knight takes e3. 17. F takes e3. Queen takes g3 check. 18. King h1. Queen h3 check. 19. King g1. Bishop g5. And White's game is in ruins, while another threat is 16. Knight f6. Followed by 17. Knight g4. And 18. Queen h2 checkmate. Queen e1. This awkward move is absolutely necessary to save the g-pawn from 16. Knight takes e3. 17. F takes e3. Queen takes g3 check. Should this pawn fall, his king could not withstand the attack. White may have intended to play 16. Bishop c5. When after 16. Knight f6. He could have put up a fight by 17. Rook takes f6. Bishop takes f6. 18. Bishop takes f8. But at the last moment saw the refutation. 16. Bishop takes c5. 17. Knight takes c5. Knight f6. And in order to stop 18. Knight g4. And 19. Queen h2 checkmate. He must give up his rook for the knight, a course which means an eventual loss. f5. Not at once. 16. Knight f6. As 17. f3. Keeps the knight out. Note how essential it is to have the g-pawn protected. With his last move Black prepares to play 17. f4. If 18. G takes f4. Then 18. Rook takes f4. 19. Bishop takes f4. Knight takes f4. And Black mates at g2. If White does not take the pawn but plays 18. Bishop c5. Black wins cleverly by 18. f3. Threatening. 19. Queen g2 checkmate. 19. E takes f3. Knight f4. Again aiming at the mate. 20. G takes f4. Rook f5. And White can only stop. 21. Rook h5. Followed by mate, by giving up his queen with 21. Queen takes e5. Bishop c5. If white tries to rid himself of black's troublesome knight by 17. Knight c3. Black pursues the attack by 17. Knight f6. 18. f3. Knight h5. Concentrating on the vital g-pawn. 19. Bishop f2. Bishop h4. Still hammering at the pawn. 20. G takes h4. Knight f4. And forces mate at g2. The text move gives white a faint chance of holding out after 17. Bishop takes c5. 18. Knight takes c5. Knight f6. 19. f3. Or if 17. Knight f6. Then 18. Rook takes f6. f4. Not only to strike at the g-pawn but also to clear a path for the rook's passage to f5 and h5 to assist the queen in a mating operation. Bishop takes e7. If instead 18. g4. To keep the rook out, black has 3 or 4 easy wins on tap. 1. 18. f3. 19. E takes f3. Knight f4. Followed by mate at g2. 2. 18. Queen takes g4 check. 19. King h2. And then 2a. 19. Rook f5. And the rook mates. 2b. 19. f3. 20. Rook g1. Queen h4 checkmate. The move played exchanges to reduce the number of pieces besetting his king. He hopes for the simple recapture by 18. Knight takes e7. When the knight, no longer centralized, is less of a menace. F takes g3. With the simple, brutal threat of 19. Queen h2 checkmate. F takes g3. The only reply. Knight e3. Threatening. 20. Queen g2 checkmate. There is no defense. 20. Rook f2. Queen takes g3 check. 21. King h1. Rook takes f2. Wins easily, or 20. Rook takes f8 check. Rook takes f8. 21. Queen f2. Rook takes f2. 22. King takes f2. Queen g2 check. 23. King takes e3. Queen takes c6. And the rest is elementary. In this game Flohr gained revenge for his loss to Piszczek in the previous game by adopting the technique with which he was defeated. He weakened the pawns around the castled king and then ripped open the defenses with a devastating attack.